welcome His Holiness Radhanath Swami to speak here. Radhanath Swami is one of today's most beloved and respected spiritual teachers, as well as a guide, community builder, philanthropist and acclaimed author. Born and raised in Chicago, at the age of 19 he discovered India's mystic devotional tradition, and now spreads his message of compassion and sustainable change around the world. He'll be speaking tonight about his remarkable adventure of discovery, which is also detailed in his book The Journey Home, Autobiography of an American Scholar. Just a few announcements. Please don't take any photos or videos. All photos and videos that we take will be available on our website and YouTube channel. And switch off your mobile phones. The talk will last for about 40 minutes and then you'll have an opportunity to ask questions. So without further ado, please welcome His Holiness Radhanath Swami.
Janachalakaya chakshurumilidham jena tasmai Sri Gurave Namah Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Nityanamine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Paschatyapi Satharine Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So grateful for this opportunity to be with all of you, Cambridge Union, this evening. Special thanks to Ken for opening the doors to the university and to her heart so that I can be with you. And thank you very much for taking your precious time to be here tonight. I was asked to speak on the subject of a book that I just wrote, entitled The Journey Home. And I just saw on the sign outside, the title of the lecture is How I think life was more simple when apples and blackberries were just fruit. I didn't think of that title, but I really think it's quite fascinating and an important subject to speak, although I have to confess that I wrote this book on an Apple computer. I typed every little word of it. Simplicity is foundational for real happiness. Because things can give some pleasure to the mind and the senses, but only relationships, love, can give pleasure to the heart. And real fulfillment is a thing of the heart. I heard a beautiful saying that in a cultured society, people use things and love people. But all too often in today's world, we love things and we use people together. And the result, so much dissatisfaction, so much depression, so much corruption on practically every level of the world. Martin Luther King, he stated that the irony of our times is we have guided missiles and misguided people. There's a well-known conversation between Werner Heisenberg, a physicist, and Albert Einstein, where he was expressing that in the West, with our science and our technology, we have created a beautiful ship providing all comforts, but we don't have a compass. It gives us direction. Science, technology, economic development, potentially these are incredibly valuable, providing we have proper ecology of our hearts, providing we have values. Values wherein we can live with integrity. Integrity means we embrace our sacred ideals, even in the face of temptation, that I can get so much more if I compromise. Even in the face of fear, that if I don't compromise, they may lose so much. And so much on the basis of these superficial human conditions, we give up the ideals of humanity. We require a strong spiritual foundation. Just a few weeks ago, I was near San Francisco, and with one of my very best friends, we decided to take a walk in the Muir Woods. This is a redwood forest. Have any of you been there? Redwood trees are the tallest, largest trees on our planet. And the Muir Woods has hundreds of such trees. Giant trees soaring to the sky. As you're walking through, there's places where the sun cannot even come through to touch you. There's clusters, sometimes 5, 6, 7 massive redwood trees. Some of them are 1,000 or more years old. Very quiet. The redwood trees have bark that's very thick and soft. So it seems to be like a special soundproof recording studio. We're walking through this very, very quiet, silent forest, looking up at these massive, wide trees. We came upon a group of tourists, and there was a forest ranger explaining to them something about redwood trees. All my life, I've always felt that God speaks to us sacred messages through nature. If we just open our ears and our hearts to hear. He explains something very fascinating. How the redwood trees, what we see, they are so wide and so high, but their roots do not go deep into the ground. So how is it possible for such a big tree above the ground to stand through even 1,000 years of tornadoes and hurricanes and storms, even earthquakes, and not fall down? He explained the roots, they grow outward under the ground. And all the different redwood trees in the forest, their roots interlock with each other. And by doing so, they give each other strength. One tree's strength provides and accesses the strength of all the other trees. The little tiny redwood trees, when they start growing, their roots interconnect with the gigantic ones. And the result is that the little one gets the strength of the big one, and the big one gets more strength from the small one because the small one's getting connected from different big trees from different sides. This is the United Kingdom. I was born in the United States. Unity is strength. But the nature of this unity is it can't be seen by the eyes. It's something within. Under the secret of the underground reality of the redwood trees. And I was thinking how good this is a lesson for humanity, socially as well as spiritually. There's a beautiful verse in Bhagavad Gita. Vidyapanaya sampane brahmani kavyasti suni chaiva svabhakicha pandita samadash. According to the Gita, what is true knowledge? What is real wisdom? It's the ability to see every living being with equal vision. Whether one is black or white or red or yellow or brown or male or female or Eastern or Western. Whether one is Christian or Jewish or Muslim or Hindu or Jain or Sikh or Parsi or agnostic or atheist. Whether one's a human or an elephant or a cow or a dog or a cat. Wherever there's life, life is sacred. When we understand the essence of who we are, our life, then we actually see our connection with other people. Not on the basis of the superficial differences, but on the basis of that unchanging truth that's within all of us. The Gita explains, Yajayate Mriyate Vakadacha. That means that the person that's seeing through the eyes and tasting through the tongue and hearing through the ears, thinking through the brain and loving through the heart, that person is of a spiritual nature. Satchit Ananda, eternal, full of knowledge, full of bliss, not subject to birth or death. That bliss that is within us is our loving propensity. In the Bible, Jesus says, what is the use if you gain the whole world but you lose your immortal soul? This is a universal principle. To love God with all your heart, mind, and soul is the first and great commandment. And what's the natural result? The testimony that you actually have a glimpse of that love is that you will love your neighbor as yourself. And everyone's our neighbor. The rich, the poor, wherever there's life, that's our neighbor. And when we understand that principle, then we're not motivated anymore by greed or arrogance, but we're motivated by compassion and love. And then we're there for each other, like the redwood trees. where we're actually interconnected. We really care. The idea of seva, or service to one another. This is a little lesson I just learned by walking through the forest. And it's actually incredible. I was thinking that our science, our technology, our development of architecture and arts has made us, some countries, into very, very big, strong redwood trees. But unless we have these roots, what we are supposed to stand for, will fall. I was born in 1950. When I was 19 years old, I began this journey that I write about in my book. In the 1960s, when I was a teenager, it was a very turbulent time. You see, when you just have an ideology, you can sometimes just act on it when it's convenient. But when it's right in front of your face and it's going to determine your life or death, take it seriously. That's what the 1960s were. People who had dark skin, African Americans, they were condemned to live in the ghetto. The Constitution gives everyone equal rights, but from a social perspective, they did not have equal rights. I was standing before this American flag every day, pledging allegiance. If you didn't, you'd get kicked out of school. And in that pledge of allegiance, it ends, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. But it wasn't like that. It was liberty, justice according to the color of your skin and according to certain other external conditions. Didn't make sense. And the Vietnam War was going on. And I was a boy. When you turn 18, you are eligible to the draft. If they call you, you go to war or you go to jail. No third option. Unless you escape from the country and become a criminal. And some of us didn't believe that war was just. And when we raised our voice to demonstrate, you had to be 21 to vote. And 18, you're forced to go to war. We had no voice, but we had to fight. And so many of my friends and their elder brothers, they died. They were wounded, or they came back total drug addicts from the stress. And when we raised our voice, I remember myself, I was tear gassed and chased by club-swinging police. And these are the people who I was told were protecting my freedom. There were some serious questions. I joined the civil rights movement. I joined the counterculture. I heard a saying that if you do not have an ideal you're willing to die for, you have nothing important to live for. I was searching for that ideal. And I thought it would be through a social political activism. But as time went on, I saw that the counterculture that I left the whole established society for had the same exact problems that we were fighting against, just with a different hairstyle and different clothes and different language. there was still arrogance, there was still hatred, there was still selfishness. At one point, after I went to one semester of college, I was 19, I was in New York City, visiting a friend. And my lifelong best friend, Gary, who I grew up with since we were 10, he called me, I met him, he said, I'm going on a summer trip to Europe. You have to come with me. We've done everything together. I said, Gary, I don't have any money, and I have a job this summer. Gary said, I don't have any money either. But Frank, our common friend, he's going to pay for both of us. I said, all right. So the next thing I know, we were on an airplane from New York to Iceland. And then we got a connecting flight to Luxembourg. And the first day in Luxembourg, we realized how Frank was going to sponsor us. The three of us were crowded into a one-man tent in a little campground. But we were happy. It was the first time in my life I was out of the country I was born. It was really going to be an expedition. I was searching for something spiritual. And even more, it was like a sociological expedition to see how other people view society, God, each other, and especially how they view America. Because I felt so culturally isolated. The first morning, Frank was robbed. We went to bathe in some little creek, and when he came back, all his money was stolen. So he said, we have to go back. We can't survive with nothing. And he walked away, and he looked back and he said, come on. And Gary and I decided, we're going to stay. So Frank left. I've never seen him since. That was 1970. So Gary and I had nothing, but we had enthusiasm. We were like little explorers. And we started hitchhiking. And we didn't know where to go because there were so many places we wanted to go. So we decided when we stand in the road and hitchhike, whoever picks us up wherever they're going, that's where we want, that's where God wants us to go. So we went to Amsterdam and Belgium, and eventually the Book of Holland, and then we came to England, and I was in London, and we were making the scene. And I was making the scene better than I ever did in my whole life. I was actually becoming really popular with people. I was popular where I lived, but this was a whole other dimension. And in those days, the way people interacted and what they were doing was quite unusual. But I was thinking, I'm enjoying and making the scene and becoming more popular than I've ever been in my whole life. And Gary and I were staying in the basement of a church where the priest let travelers stay for free. And every night after Gary went to sleep, I would sit on the embankment of the River Thames, just across from the Parliament building. And I'd look down at the river. And I was wondering, what am I doing? It's like I'm fighting against my own inner nature, trying to become accepted by society, by my little society. And I looked up at the clock of Big Ben, and I remember I just spoke to the clock. I said, am I just wasting my time? And I looked down at the river and I was wondering, where is the river of destiny going to lead me? And then I went into a little church, St. Martin's of the Fields, and I opened the Bible. Just, what does God want to say to me? And the words that came were, come out from among men and be separate. And I was thinking, that's what I have to do. So then instead of hanging out with the counterculture, I started going to cathedrals and monasteries and art museums and going out into nature, trying to get a deeper connection. I heard the words of Gandhi, be the change you want to see in the world. Eventually, Gary and I, it's a long story, but it's actually quite fascinating. It's in the book. We were living in a cave. How many of you have lived in a cave? We were living on a mountain on the island of Crete in Greece. And by that time, my spiritual aspiration was burning. I would go to the top of a mountain and I would read holy books and I would pray and I would meditate from sunrise till sunset. And Gary did the same thing on the seaside. And after the sunset, we'd meet in the cave and we'd exchange our experiences. One evening, as the sun was setting, it was so beautiful. It was just awesome being on that mountaintop. The whole sky was light and tangerine and golden, and all those colors were sparkling in the Mediterranean Sea. And at that point, I heard a voice. I heard from within my heart a silent voice which was the loudest thing I ever heard in my life. It spoke 3 words. And I understood if I follow this, I have to leave everything behind. Life will never be the same for me. Would you like to hear the 3 words? Go to India. India. I never met an Indian person in my life. I never ate Indian food. I didn't know India was. I had no map and I had no money for a map. I went back to the cave. And Gary was sitting in meditation with a little candle. I said, Gary, something incredible happened to me today. Gary said, something incredible happened to me. I said, what happened? He said, you won't believe me. I said, I will. He said, no, you will never believe me. I said, please tell me. He said, at sunset, I heard a voice. I said, you heard a voice? What did he say? Gary said, you won't believe it. It said, go to Israel. Israel? He said, I told you you wouldn't believe me. No, I didn't. Say it again. Where? He said, Israel. We should go to Israel. God wants us to go to Israel. I said, Gary, he told me to go to India. India. There was total silence as we looked out at the stars emerging from the darkness. And then I said, Gary, it's sunrise tomorrow. I'm leaving for India. He said, hitchhiking in Europe is one thing. But going to the Middle East, you can't hitchhike with no money. I said, I believe I'm being called there. I have to go. The next morning I started hitchhiking. It was quite an adventure. Through Turkey, Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan. It took 6 months. These days, I take the same journey, British Airways. It takes 9 hours. But it's not the same. It's safer, definitely. But on my way, when you just totally, when you have no money, you really have to put yourself in a vulnerable situation. You're dependent on people. And you really have no protection except what I learned is my prayer. There were situations, life and death situations, where I was helpless. And it was very humbling. But oh, how I grew through those experiences. I'll tell you one experience that shook me to the core. It's a simple story, but I was just in such a receptive state then that it had such an effect on me. I was in Kandahar, Afghanistan. And I was invited by some of these very, very friendly, cordial, hospitable, kind Afghani people to have some tea with them in a tea stall. Now these people were quite poor economically. There was no tables, there was no chairs, just a little shack, and we all squatted on the ground. And they gave us tea. No milk, they don't put milk in their tea. As we were drinking our tea, there was about 6 of us. This little boy, he was probably 15 or 16 years old. He came in. And he really attracted our attention. He was in total poverty. He was in rags, and a very, very old, tattered, stained turban, some stained, tattered robes. He was emaciated kid. What really shook me was he was blind. There was nothing covering his eyes. They were grossly misfigured. Swollen, all different kind of blurred colors. My heart quaked looking at those eyes. He had a stick. And on one end of the stick there was a tin can. And in the other end of the stick there was a nail. And he had a piece of wire nailed across it. And he was playing it like a musical instrument. I don't think there was no way to tune that. It was just like blum, 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 blum. And as he was blum, blum, he began to sing. He was singing religious prayers. He didn't have a beautiful voice from a technical perspective, but he sang with such emotion. And I looked at his face. He was beaming, he was smiling. He literally lit up that whole place with his joy. He sang for about 45 minutes and all of us were totally transfixed. This was a culture shock for me. I was thinking, everything that I was brought up to believe will make me happy. Wealth, health, prestige. This boy didn't have anything. But he's the happiest person I've ever met in my life. I've never seen such joy. What is happiness? I was shaken. Happiness is something that's within us. And when we find it within us, we can express it in whatever we may do. this made me even more serious about my inner search. I studied Christianity, Judaism in synagogues and monasteries in Europe, and I studied Islam under some scholars of the Middle East as I traveled through. And finally, after so many diseases and so many near-death experiences and so many trials and tribulations, I was still a teenager. I aged about 30 years in that journey. I finally came to the border of India, and I had such expectations. And the border guard told me, unless you have $200, you cannot go. I paid 26 cents. I was rejected. She said, we have enough beggars in India, we don't want another one. So I sat there in no man's land, begging and pleading and being rejected for about 6 hours. If you want to know what finally happened, you can read the book. But somehow or other, by incredible arrangement, I got in. And it was night. It turned dark within minutes after I got in India, and I was just walking through some fields in Punjab. And I didn't know anyone, and I was alone, and I didn't know whether I should go right or left or anywhere else. But I felt so much at home. I was like embracing the stars and the trees and the fields. It was like Mother welcoming me home. I went to the Himalayas. And there I adopted the life of a sadhu. A sadhu is a wandering seeker of truth, usually homeless. Sometimes I was living in caves with yogis, sometimes myself. I was meeting many very, very famous or unknown spiritual leaders, yogis, Buddhists, Hindus. At one time, I was sitting on a rock in the Ganges from sunrise to sunset, just meditating, praying. And after sunset, I lived in a cave in the forest. And so many wonderful lessons came to me just by watching the river. I was seeing how the waves of the river are so affected by everything around. The wind, people throwing things at it. They're always changing. But the current down deep is constant. And one day while I was sitting there, I happened to see a hawk flying over my head. It's a very big hawk. And where I'm from in Illinois, in America, we don't have big hawks. We just have little sparrows and crows. This was a big hawk. And he was circling above me, lower, 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 till he was just a few meters above my head. I looked at him and he had these glistening yellow eyes and sharp claws and a very, very sharp, pointed, curved beak. He was coming lower and lower. And I was all alone. There was no one around. Suddenly, the hawk dove headlong right into the river. Went underwater. There was a skirmish. It was splashing and splashing and splashing. I was watching, wondering what's happening. It was just a few feet in front of me. And the hawk emerged from the river with a fish in its claws. And I looked in the eyes of that fish. It was about 1 foot long. That poor fish was totally disoriented. was thinking, that fish was just going about its day like any other day. Swimming upstream, downstream, across stream, probably with his friends, family, looking for food, playing. When at least expected moment, the hawk of faith ripped it right out of its complacent state. And the hawk went higher and higher and flew into the forest with the fish. And I remember thinking at that time, what a good lesson this is. We read about it in the papers, it happens to people we know, sometimes it even happens to us. And we're just going about our day, and suddenly something happens that changes everything. Whether we're rich, whether we're poor, whether we're educated, whether we're uneducated, it could happen at any time to anyone. But then I was thinking, if that fish was swimming deeper in the Ganges, the hawk could not affect it. And in the same way, as long as our consciousness is on this superficial level of just trying to enjoy things and having superficial relationships with people on the basis of these things, then the hawk of faith could really affect our lives. But if we go deeper, if we find deep fulfillment within ourselves, if we find love within ourselves, if we find that connection to God within ourselves, then whatever the hawk of faith may do, hawk of fate, we're in a place where it can't really disturb our own happiness, cannot disturb our integrity, cannot disturb where we're going in our life. I traveled through Himalayas and India for about a year. And one day I was in Nepal. At that time I was actually staying in a Tibetan Buddhist monastery. And I decided I just wanted to take a walk. And this place was called Swayambhunath. It's a mountain with a temple. And it's surrounded by miles and miles and miles of rice paddies. I had no reason to walk that day, except I just felt like walking. So I walked for a couple hours. I went all the way to Kathmandu. I had nothing to do there. I had no money, so I just started walking back. It was the monsoon rain season. As I was walking, I saw massive clouds forming in the sky. And I know what a monsoon rain is like. I had no umbrella. I only had one set of clothes like this that I was given the first day I was in the Himalayas. They were sadhu robes that somebody gave me. So it started drizzling. I was looking for a tree or a house or something to get shelter, but there was nothing. And there was not a single other human being in this vast expanse of rice paddies. And for those of you who know rice paddies, it's really slushy and muddy, and there's just a little border of about 12 inches that you can walk on. So I saw one other human being in that massive rice paddy with an umbrella. And I ran as fast as I could without slipping into the rice paddy to somehow or other get under that umbrella. And I got behind him and went under the umbrella. And soon after, torrential rainstorm for about 20 minutes. And he was walking and I was walking right behind. He didn't look back. Just looked like an old guy. When the rain stopped, I was going the wrong direction. So I said, thank you. And I was about to turn the other way. And he turned around. And the man was shocked. He dropped his umbrella in the mud. He looked at me. And I looked at him. We were both totally shocked. It was Gary. My friend, we had no communication for 1 year. Because in those days there were not cell phones or anything like that. Internet. I was homeless, he was homeless, traveling. Things were not out for this meeting. He told me he actually went to Israel. And he worked on a kibbutz. And he actually earned money. Worked for about a year. And there was a bus starting from London, I believe. It was called the Magic Bus. It went from London to Delhi. And he got on it in Istanbul. And somehow or other made his residence in a little house in that rice paddy. And that. It's a long story, but somehow or other we got separated again. On the bank of the Ganges, in a place called Patna, I was living with a very old sadhu. He was Ram Sevak Swami. He was about 85 years old. I was 20 at the time. And he just took me in like a son. He didn't speak English. But there was an old man, almost 90, that spoke English. And we would have long talks about philosophy, theology, sociology, so many subjects. He was very learned. And every day he would take me to his best friend's house. Not house, his office. It was an X-ray clinic. And his friend's name was Mohammed. Mohammed would speak from the Quran. Narayan Prasad, my friend, would speak from the Bhagavad Gita, the Ramayana, the Vedas. And I would speak from whatever I knew. I kind of got collective ideas. One day I was sitting on the bank of the Ganges, and I asked Narayan Prasad, in a country where Hindus and Muslims have so much conflict, how is it that you're best friends? I'll never forget his answer. He looked at me and said, a dog will recognize his master in any way his master or her master dresses. Sometimes the master is in a tuxedo, sometimes in blue jeans, sometimes in robes, sometimes in underwear, sometimes naked. But the dog will recognize the master. He said, we understand from our scriptures that God has appeared or sent his divine servants to this world in many times and many ways throughout human history. If we don't recognize our God in another person's religion, then we are less than the dog. In my journey, somehow or other, I ended up, I was going somewhere else, but I actually got trapped somewhere. And when I was about to leave that place, I got typhoid fever and I couldn't leave. And the name of the place is Vrindavan. It's the place of Krishna. Krishna is the name of God, which means all attractive, all sweet, all loving, all beautiful. And there they practice what is called bhakti, the yoga or the spiritual path of devotion. That the principle is the most fundamental need of every living being is to love and be loved. If we have everything else but not that, we can't really be happy. And if we have that, whether we have everything else or not, there's something very deep. And that natural need to love and be loved, the origin of that, is the eternal soul, the eternal self's natural love for the divine, for God. We call Krishna. There are many names. That supreme origin of everything. And to awaken that love through unselfish seva or service, and through connecting our consciousness and cleaning our consciousness, the ecology of our hearts, naturally that love awakens. It's our greatest potential. In a very mysterious way in Vrindavan, I met the teacher who I was later to follow, Srila Prabhupada, who taught a very, very universal but very specific culture, lifestyle, philosophy of awakening that love. And in my own heart, I found that this was so inclusive to the essence of what I found in so many spiritual traditions. And through this journey home, I realized that our home is wherever we are connected to that love, to that devotion, to our beloved. And wherever we can share that love, and wherever we need to. Not long ago, I was in a university in Mumbai. It was a university of chartered and certified accountants. And I gave a talk. Whatever I say, I don't know how good or bad it is. I just try to share what I have been given. At the end, I asked for questions. And one particular person stood up. And when he stood up, everyone in the room went, ooh. I realized this man is definitely charismatic and influential. He started screaming at me, really violently. He said, "You are a cheater, you are nonsense, and I reject everything you have said." And everybody was in pin drop silence. I said, "Oh, can you explain?" He said, "What if everybody in the world became a Swami like you? Who would grow the food? Who would do the banking? Who would run the governments? Therefore, you're simply cheating us, and I reject whatever you have said." May I tell you, he got a long-standing ovation. There was 400 students in that auditorium, and they stood up, they were clapping, and they were howling. And I said a little prayer. What am I supposed to say? And somehow or other, after about a minute or two, when the cheers went down, I said, "My dear sir, what if everyone in the world became an accountant like you?" on the governments. In fact, if everyone in the world became an accountant like you, there would be a 100% employment rate because no one would need an accountant. There is a need for accountants. There's a need for bankers, and there's a need for farmers, and there's a need for teachers, there's a need for politicians. There's a need for little swamis like me too. You see, the social body is much like the human body. Each part of the body has a very specific shape, color, and function. And one part of the body can't do the function of another. The feet cannot do what the ears do. The kidneys cannot do what the eyes do. The heart cannot do what the brain does. The stomach cannot do what the knee does. They're all different shapes. They're all different sizes. They have very, very different functions. But they all cooperate with each other because they're one body. So similarly, within our human society today, there are people of different colors. There are people of different natures. There's people of different occupations. When we understand, like those redwood trees, how we're all connected, and we connect with each other. You see, every part of the body honors and respects the function of every other part. There's no ego, I'm better than you. Unity and diversity. We're diversified, but there's a oneness among us. I told that student, when we understand this deeper level of how we're all the children of the one same source, that one supreme God. And we're all related. We can honor and respect with compassion. And then we have a healthy social body. I'm a little shy to tell you this, but I'll tell you anyway. I got a longer, louder standing ovation and when I said that, even that challenger, he went like this. He accepted. So yes, the journey home, it's a journey that everyone in their own way is on. It's a journey to, when we find our home within ourselves, then we can be at home everywhere and anywhere. And we find a place where whether apples and blueberries are fruits, or whether they're phones and computers, we can see the beauty of how to utilize them with compassion. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much to Robin and Swami for this talk. We now have 20 minutes of questions, so if anyone has a question or comment,
At the beginning of your talk, you had mentioned ideals, and our human life is not worth living without ideals. So my question is, where is the origin of ideas? Can not a man live free from all ideas? And is not human life more higher than any idea? Thank you.
The potential that we have in human life can facilitate the realization of the highest ideals. From a spiritual perspective, the highest ideals are embodied by those great personalities who have found within themselves what we call that prema, that selfless love. Love for God, love for all living beings. The evolution of human society is from the need to get to the joy of giving. When I was a little boy, on a very basic level, I learned this from my own mother. I had a surgery. I talk about this in this book that I wrote, if you read. And when I came out of the anesthesia, my mother, such a loving lady, was right at the bedside, waiting for me, waiting and waiting. And when I came out, I looked up at her and coughed and said, "Mother, your cigarette is making me sick." She had smoked cigarettes for 20 years up to that point. When I said that, she started to cry. And frantically, she put out her cigarette. And she put her hand on my hand. And she said, "My son, if my smoking cigarettes is a disturbance to you, I will never smoke another cigarette in my life." That was the last cigarette she ever smoked. Now that's a pretty big sacrifice, just giving up cigarettes in one day like that. But there was an ideal. Higher than just enjoying a cigarette and even the intense habit of smoking the cigarette was the ideal of showing love to someone you love. Yes, that was an ideal. From the spiritual path that expands to a deeper and deeper sense of cleaning the heart of selfish passion, and greed, and envy, and arrogance, and anger, and understanding that there's something sacred within us. The love of the soul. To strive for that has been proclaimed by all spiritual paths to be the highest ideal of a human being.
He spoke at the importance of the significance of love and affinity. Myriads of books and pamphlets brought from other countries to this country that advocate hatred and malice, and yet nobody does something about it from fear of being schooled and berated. My question is whether religious tolerance overrides cultural religious considerations in a given society.
My experience and what I learned from many saints is that, like that fish in the river, what our conception of our religion, and I've had these dialogues with monks of Christianity and imams of Islam and scholars of Hinduism. When we're swimming on the superficial, shallow aspect of the river of our spiritual path, then, the various waves that come either from within or without cause us to have misconceptions about what we're doing. On a ritualistic basis, without really understanding deep down what it's for, and without connecting to that, then the rituals could divide us. The philosophies can divide us and cause arrogance and hatred and violence and vengeance. Spiritual life is meant for transformation. Transform arrogance into humility, greed into generosity, hatred into compassion, envy into being a well-wisher. That's where we go deeper. Where we see these qualities, it means a very, very shallow, superficial conception of spirituality or religion. And what's the solution? One thing we could do is try to go deeper ourselves and try to be instruments of that deeper level of consciousness. Yes, it's everywhere. Amazing. Religion is meant to cleanse us of these inner enemies of greed and envy and arrogance. But on a superficial level, people have the inclination, not everybody, but there are people who have the inclination to use their spiritual path as a weapon to serve those enemies within ourselves. Religious tolerance alone may have some value in certain situations, no doubt. But the real solution is to actually understand what is at the core of the essence. My guru, Srila Prabhupada, when somebody was debating a philosophical point with him, he said, philosophy and religion have no value unless they create good character. In the Bible, it is said to build your house on solid rock. If you build your house on sand, it's going to be knocked down by the winds. That solid foundation, those roots that we were talking about in the redwood tree forest, if they're solid, if they're based on the essence, on the truth, then we naturally transcend all of these egoistic differences that we have. Does that answer your question? In our own tradition, we believe that chanting God's names or chanting these mantras cleanses our hearts, tunes us in, and connects us to that inner essence within us. And when we're tuned in, then we can actually be instruments of grace in whatever we do.
balances itself out. And I was wondering about suffering and happiness. And I was wondering, I mean, I don't know, 'cause in my position, I can't really relate to some people who obviously have really terrible lives. But I was wondering the pleasure they get out of the smallest of things, that it's kind of...
Can you speak more into the mic?
Okay, sorry. Did you hear anything that I said?
My ears are 61 years old, so
Okay. I was just wondering for people who are kind of very disadvantaged and obviously have terrible lives, I was wondering if there was kind of a balance, you think, from your experience, from seeing people who, like the blind man with stick, if there's kind of a balance of suffering, everyone in the end over life suffers the same amount as the happiness that they receive. To kind of mirror the balance of the body, for example, how everything works with each other. Do you understand what I mean?
I think so.
I was just
Try. There's the concept of as ye sow shall ye reap, or with every action comes an equal corresponding reaction. Or as we used to say in the streets of Chicago, what goes around comes around. So whatever we speak, whatever we do, there will be a reaction. And this is called the law of karma in the Bhagavad Gita. And this, from our philosophical perspective, that the soul is eternal, and the karmas, or the reactions and actions of this life and previous lives also are affecting each of us. At the same time, in this world, whoever we are, there will be happiness and there will be suffering. The various degrees are understood from this perspective of karma. But as compassionate human beings, our purpose is not to judge anyone according to their karma or according to their situation. Our position, like the roots of those redwoods, is we're all connected, we're all family. And we believe this goes beyond us humans, but to all living beings. I see how people, they really love their dogs or their cats. My little brother, when I was a little boy, he had a pet turtle. His name was Lucky. And when that turtle died, my brother cried for about a week. And I was wondering, so many turtles died, right? Because he had a relationship. Because that turtle was a living being who wanted to be happy. So it's the nature of life. We all want to be happy. We all want to avoid suffering. And the human ideal